The best organizations will always attract the best clients.
Today's guest is someone who has spent over 3 decades led some of the world's biggest brands.
Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, rebranded the company to Meta. Spectacular failure. But what is he really good at? Really, really good leaders are very few. It's all about personality. I think a brand's DNA should never change. One of the brands that I worked with, Gillette.
Biggest mistake marketers make when they try to globalize an idea.
You don't need to do anything.
The data was available, but the decision still came down to...
The more we talk about data, the more there is a danger. Creativity is not just about communication. It will get worse before it gets better.
Welcome to Marketing Growth Circle. This podcast is about real growth, not hacks, not trends, and definitely not theory. In every episode, we sit down with leaders who have actually built brands, led teams, and made decisions when the cost of being wrong was real. Today's guest is someone who has spent over 3 decades doing exactly that. Sanjay Chaudhari has worked across India, the Middle East, and Asia. He has led some of the world's biggest brands, Unilever, P&G, Gillette, Coca-Cola, American Express, and held senior leadership roles across Ogilvy, Grey, and Publicis Group. But what makes this conversation different isn't the titles, it's the pattern. Almost every role Sanjay has taken on has been about fixing what's broken or building what didn't exist. Often as an outsider, often under pressure, and often when the stakes were highest. In this episode, we won't walk through a resume. Instead, we'll focus on 4 areas Sanjay is deeply passionate about: leadership in the real world, building global brands across cultures, career strategy in an AI-first world, creativity and where it still truly matters. If you are someone who has to make decisions when there is no perfect answer, this conversation is for you. Sanjay, welcome to Marketing Growth Circle.
Thank you for having me, Gautham. It's a pleasure to be here and an even more pleasure to talk about things that I'm very passionate about. You've given a good enough introduction about me. I've been very, very fortunate in my career. And I think some of the things that helped my career we'll touch upon as we go through this conversation, because the good fortune of having given the chance to work with such big brands in, massive markets, very, very diverse markets. I've worked in Japan and China, as well as in Beirut and Colombo, right? Very, very different markets. I worked on big brands at a global level as well as brands at a local level. And what has enabled that opportunity is, I think, something that I would love to share with your listeners as possibly, suggestions on how they could approach their own careers. So again, thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you, Sanjay. I'm really excited, about this conversation and your rich experience. I think the first section is mostly about leadership and decision making. I think one of in our past conversation, you have said leadership theories are simple to understand, but extremely hard to practice, right? From your experience, what do most leadership theories miss when things get messy in the real world?
It's a very good question, and I think the right way to start off. Everybody talks about leadership. Everybody, wants to be a good leader and so on. Leadership actually is quite simple. I think where it starts falling apart is in what are the key things you need to be able to be a good leader. Back, I think about a year and a half ago, I used to teach a course on leadership skills at Next University. And one of the things I passionately believe in is leadership actually comes down to personality. Because if it was so easy to follow theories on leadership, and believe me, there's quite a few, right from the 1920s onwards. And even if you go back, with the kind of stuff you see on LinkedIn, there will always be 10 leadership principles you can learn from Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan or whoever. If it was so easy to read up on a theory, this world would be filled with great leaders. Correct? But that's not the case. Really, really good leaders are very few. And when I say good leaders, I'm not referring to just leaders in the business field. I'm referring to leaders in science. I'm referring to leaders, even if you start looking at, places like charity or places like public policy, there are very few good leaders around. And that's why for me, the more I dug deeper into my own career, the more I studied principles of leadership and so on, it became very clear that it's all about personality. If you are an indecisive person by nature, no reading of any books, no attending workshop is going to make you decisive. Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are some people who prefer to seek consensus. That's not bad. You're just possibly not in the right environment that needs consensus. Correct. So, for my thinking, I believe that the most important thing to do for any person starting their career is identify what kind of a leader are they. And it doesn't have to be at the workplace. It's not like, for 23 years of your life, you have no personality traits. And then in your first job, you start picking up personality traits.
Mm.
Back in school, we used to have discipline heads. We used to have prefects. We used to have monitors. These are natural leaders. A lot of them are natural leaders. Some of them come up through favoritism, but the difference between them becomes very clear. So I'm saying, find out what kind of a person you are by nature, and then very critically embrace it. Many people think that consensus is a it's a sign of weakness. Not necessarily. There are enough roles. For example, if you look at an organization like the United Nations, bad example, but its principle is about driving consensus, because you cannot fix things at a global level on certain things without consensus. So, people like Nelson Mandela and so on, they were very inspiring leaders, but where they thrive was in being able to bridge consensus. Correct? Um, Nelson Mandela on one hand, Genghis Khan on the other, two very different kinds of leaders. So it's not wrong. You don't have to feel that, oh my gosh, I'm not a decisive leader. What do I do? No. You have to first identify who you are as a leader. Secondly, very importantly, be happy with it. Embrace it. Right? The minute you embrace who you are as a person is the first step to becoming, who you could be as a person. And I think then the critical thing is to find the roles that will make you succeed. Yeah. Um, when you and I chatted a couple of weeks ago, my point was somebody who is a person who gets joy out of running an NGO, correct? For example, education for children and so on. That person would not thrive in an environment like investment banking, where it's all
Mm.
cutthroat. Yeah, his values and principles won't let him be a strong leader or her be a strong leader. So identify who you are as a person, embrace it, and then find where you can exploit it. Okay, so for me, that is the first fundamental factor about what is leadership. How do you identify a leader? Now, coming down to where it fails. Basically, if you see leadership, there are, in my mind, four critical factors. The first one, which is the most critical one, is set a goal. Leadership without a goal is just letting, the water run up the beach. Business as usual without having an idea of what's going to happen next, where should we invest next, what kind of talent should we have, and so on. So the first thing is you need to set a goal, because anyone who joins an organization is joining the organization for personal growth. They're not doing it for charity. When it comes down to personal growth, you want to be known as, I was part of the team which did X. Or, that success, that was my team. So it's critical that people who are following you know what they're going to get out of it. Yeah. So set a goal. Secondly, your goal being set without the right people to execute it doesn't work. So, having set a goal, what you need to do is find the right people. Third, once you've got this right team, you have to empower them. It cannot be a team where the tiniest of decisions have to be run up the ladder, or the teams are worried that, if we don't consult with the leader, what will he say? And I think related to that, it's a factor of trust, correct? If you trust your team, you will empower them. If you don't trust your team, you'll micromanage them. And related to the trust is the reality that it's not a perfect world. Nobody is perfect. Things will go wrong. Now, when that happens, do you back your team or do you throw them under the bus? So, set a goal, find the right people, empower them, give them your support, be behind them when things go wrong. And most importantly, as important as the first one, which is setting the goal, the fourth principle is get out of the way. Because if you have made all these efforts to find the right people, you cannot be the pothole on the highway of progress. You cannot be the speed bump. You need to step out of the way. Now, if you see these four things, each of them has their own places or pitfalls where leadership goes wrong. Firstly, not having a clear goal or rapidly changing goals. Secondly, not having the right people. Some people assume that, to maintain my role as a leader, I need to surround myself with people who will always support me. Not going to help, because nobody is then going to take a decision which could be against your wishes. Yeah. The third one is constantly micromanaging, not giving people enough flexibility. And many times you'll see people who have left organizations, you'll see them saying that I did not have any authority. Everything was second guessed. Yeah. And I think the last bit, which is possibly the most difficult one, is staying out of the way. Because to an extent, leadership, is about personality, but it's also visibility. And it takes a lot of maturity to not want to be constantly in front of everyone saying, the success is all because of me. And that's why when you see really good leaders, they never take all the credit. Yeah. It's always, the credit is always shared, the blame is always taken. Yeah. And there's very, very few strong leaders who do that. So these are the four principles, and these four principles are where it falls apart. Yeah.
Understood. I think that's a powerful reframing, especially the first idea about leadership. It isn't something you learn into, but something you first need to understand about yourself and our personality, and then see where we could fit in, and then also the four principles or the framework which talks about setting the goal and then having the right team and then giving the team the control and staying out of the way. So I think these are some of the key takeaways from the conversation, right? I think let's jump into the next question. Like you often been brought in when organizations were under pressure. The performance was declining or the trust is broken or crisis situation, right? When you walk into a situation like that, what do you look for first before making any decision?
Okay. I think the first thing, so let's take an example of, like you said at the start, my roles have been in two areas, either setting up something that wasn't there before. I started my overseas career by, rolling out the toolkits for Unilever, which had never been done before. And now we're talking about 99. Yeah. So it was a completely new way of doing things and so on. Or the second one was where, things were not working right. Team was under pressure, clients not happy, threatening to take the business away, and so on and so forth. Now, in a situation like this, when teams are under pressure, the first thing to do, obviously, is to find out what is the source of that pressure, because pressure doesn't exist in a vacuum. Yeah, I mean it's physics principle. Uh, how come there is so much unhappiness? How come there is so much dissatisfaction? There must be a reason for it. And my playbook has been very straightforward, whichever team I've been in. Right. I'll give you an extreme example. One of my roles, I led an organization of 120 people. Now, my first month, I met every single one of those people, no matter what role they did, and understood how they were working, what their opinions were about the company, what their opinions was about the client, and so on. This gives you a good idea of what do people see as their own role in the organization and what are their opinions about what they believe their performance adds to the organization. Then I did the same thing with our clients. I met every single one of our clients across every single designation, because you know how it is. Sometimes the junior clients have the most day to day interactions with your teams, and the senior clients will probably come in once a month or whatever. So it's very critical. And again, when you're a leader, you end up thinking that, oh, I should just be talking to the CEO or the marketing director or whatever. That's not true. You need to speak to everyone to understand what the issues are. So the next thing I did was spoke to every single one of our clients, and it was very clear there was a massive gap between how the teams thought they were doing and what the client perceived as the output. And that gives you the answer. We are failing miserably as far as the client is concerned, but we do not know we are failing. We think the client is being unreasonable. Correct. And that's why you will hear in the organization, like, don't worry about him, he's never satisfied. Yeah? No matter what you do, he's never satisfied. Deep down, there must be something we're doing wrong. And it's very critical to find out what that is. So that gap, which I was able to identify, was what we needed to fix. Now, once you know what the problem is, it's very easy to find a solution to fix it. And the hard part then comes in implementing that solution. Because
Mm,
sometimes that solution might have very drastic measures associated with
mm.
it. correct? There was another situation where the creative team had been working very passionately, very passionately for 4 months on a project with a client. And as time went by, obviously the pressure went higher and higher because we had to go to market and the work was not ready. Now, that pressure in turn was giving pressure to the creative team. Now, the only solution was to change the creative team.
Mm.
If you have been doing this for 4 months and you've not succeeded, something is crucially wrong. And,
Mm.
they will always say, let's get a fresh pair of eyes on this and so on. But there was a little bit of, how can I put it, hesitation in saying, these guys have poured their sweat and blood and tears for the last 5 months. How can we do that? Let's give them one more chance. Let's give them one more chance. But then the difficult decision is sorry, not happening. This is not going to happen. We need to get somebody new completely. And believe me, in that situation, which we'd been struggling for months, which is why I was brought in the first place, the new team solved it in 2 days. Yeah. Now, you can see from a client's perspective also, they see an agency is not afraid to
Mm.
make drastic changes when necessary. So, implementing the solution, first, finding out what the problem is. And secondly, identifying, therefore, if this is the problem, what should be my solution? And then implementing the solution.
The gap you mentioned, right, between how teams see themselves and how clients see them feels brutally simple, but say that's powerful. It suggests that the leadership often starts by confronting uncomfortable truth, not by creating new strategies, but finding what is the say challenge or the problem and coming up with say solutions, even if it's a drastic change. I think that's something. Those are my key takeaways from this conversation. And you've talked about difference between data and judgment in one of our conversations. Can you walk us through a moment where the data was available, but the decision still came down to courage rather than analysis?
Sure. And I think it's partly related to what we've just been discussing.
Mm.
Identifying what's wrong is all
Mm.
about looking back and seeing, what was wrong and so on. And people try to stay away from it because, like I said, it involves taking a difficult decision. The easiest way forward is always preferred, and it's usually not the right way forward. So, going back to the question, I think, the more we talk about data, the more there is a danger of just kind of getting paralyzed by analysis. Yeah. Data is important, but I think there are two caveats to it. The first is it needs to be the right kind of data. And here, what I mean is it's not that, all data is correct. If you look at an organization like a Unilever or a P&G, the amount of research they do and the amount of information they have on their consumers is gratifying. Yeah. If you had to work with them, you could literally find out a lot of information that's just available with them. But what's important to know is, am I looking at the right data set? So the first thing to do is to identify what is the correct data set. Now, having done that, I think the most important thing you need to come to grips with, by its very nature, data is telling you what has happened before. Yeah, it cannot tell you what will happen in the future. And I'll give you a very simple example. There was a very interesting thing where they were doing an analysis on, again, this goes back to data. They were doing an analysis on how many Elvis Presley impersonators were there in the world. So it started out with, in the past, after Elvis passed away, there were so many impersonators in this state, and then it grew to so many in the US. And those are facts, correct? But the interpretation of those facts was, if growth continues at that rate, by a certain year, everyone in the world will be an Elvis Presley impersonator. Yeah? Now that is where it falls apart. So data can tell you what has happened. It can't predict the future. It can give you a good idea of it, but it can't predict the future. So good strategy is first built on identifying the right data, then testing it rigorously. Yeah. Is the data really valid? Does it meet all the statistical norms and so on? Then using that data to put the next step forward, which is all about goal setting, correct? When we talk
Mm.
about leadership. Now, when you're doing that goal setting, there is a risk it may or may not be correct because you don't know what will happen. Because again, I keep going back. If life was so simple, Why would every organization not be successful? Because everyone has access to the same tools. And now, especially with AI and agents, anyone can do the same thing. It doesn't happen because you don't know what the next steps are. So the way I see it is validated data with good judgment will not necessarily be wrong. But you have to make sure that you're flexible enough to change if necessary. Look at what has happened to us in the past. The very recent past, we had COVID. No one could have predicted that. If you see the first industry to get impacted, tourism, every tourism authority in the world would have had a graph showing how tourism is going to build. And in 2 months, it went away. But the nations that managed to recover faster were the ones who planned for what comes after. Correct? So circumstances might come your way, and then you have to be reasonable enough to change and adapt and turn. So it's very critical to have the right data to look at it. And then when things change, to have the courage to walk away from it. Now, let me give you an example. I used to work on surf in India. And maybe you may not remember because I think you're too young. But surf had a very iconic character by the name of Lalita ji. And here we are talking about in the 1980s, around 1984, I think, was the first commercial. She was an icon for the brand Surf. She was played by a lady by the name of Kavita Chaudhary. And people swore by her. Even in the ad world in India, it was like Lalita ji kehti hai kind of a thing. She helped build the brand to a massive success. Okay. And she was right in the 80s. But what happened? People change over time. We keep having these conversations amongst ourselves, Gen Z, Gen A, Gen X, Gen Y, and we are still the same group, more or less. So imagine how much of a change it would have been with Lalita ji. So she was perfect for a period of time. She was very successful for her, but then it stopped working. And again, Unilever being Unilever, did a lot of rigorous testing. What it came down to was a very interesting fact. And this is where, I have immense respect for that organization. I'm grateful to that organization for having given me all the opportunities and chances to learn from them. At a point in time in the 80s, women were still looking for role models, for people who could tell them, what, this is the right choice. But as India opened up in the 90s, women were becoming more and more self aware. They were getting much more confidence and they no longer needed somebody to tell them what to do. It was almost like, who are you to tell me? I know how to run my life. And that's where the key inflection was. Lalita ji was still somebody telling you how to run your life, and people didn't want to listen to her. Now, once the client found out about that, imagine having to take the decision to step away from somebody who was an icon for your brand. And they did it, right? They realized it. They were very unhappy, obviously. When you have grown up with an icon attached to your brand, the worry about what will happen. Is this research valid? Oh, we just heard two groups. What about the rest of the country? How will they find us? How will they respond if we reject Lalita ji? To have the courage to do it and see what happens is incredible. And they did it. They took the step and moved forward.
Got it.
Yeah. So they realized the data was clearly pointing them in a different direction, and it took a lot to do it.
Got it. I love that example. It highlights something many leaders miss. Data doesn't decide, but people do. And often the hardest decision are the ones where the data supports multiple paths, but only one feels right for the future. And taking that decision is what matters. So I think many leaders confuse leadership with consensus, like you said. In your view, when does listening becomes hesitation, and how should leaders know when it's time to stop debating and decide?
I think going back, to what we discussed, personality, it is that I don't think you can not listen to people, because you will never become a good leader unless you have input from everybody. I think input and consensus are two very different things. I think when it comes down to input, you need all the input that you can to help you make sure, to help guide your judgment, to help you decide what the next stage should be. But then once you've decided, you need to be convinced of it yourself. You will only seek consensus if you're not sure of what you want to do. So the first thing is you need to have the judgment to be very clear that yes, we're doing the right thing, because at the end of the day, if you're the CEO, that's what you were hired to do. You are not hired to take consensus from everyone. So I think it just comes down to being confident about the fact that you've chosen a good way forward based on your judgment, based on information. You have the right team, and that's it. You need to know that I believe in what I'm doing. I believe I have the right people, and if we put it to test, it'll work.
You have led teams during COVID, economic collapse, and organizational research in the past. When fear is high and clarity is low, what is the leader's real job in those moments?
I think in this one, I'll go back to those four personality traits I mentioned. Set a goal, identify the right people, support them, back them, and then stay out of the way. I think in an environment like that, it was a very interesting time because COVID was a shared problem. Yeah. So in that sense, it was easy to get along with. Uh,
Hmm.
if you see, for example, I was in Sri Lanka at the time, but the whole world was facing it. So you knew everyone was in the same boat. Some people might get out of it faster than others. So it was a shared problem. And therefore, you felt that, yeah, you're not alone in this. But the minute that ended, we had the financial collapse. So it almost felt like back to back problems. In a situation like that, I think the most important thing you need is stability. You need to have that clarity. Look, guys, this is what we are going to do. Yes, we've had COVID. Not a problem. Here's how we will work with COVID and continue doing where we set out to go. Yes, we now have an economic problem, but this is how we will adapt to it, right? Being stable was very clear, very critical at that point in time. So that's what I would say. In very uncertain times, the best thing you can bring to the table is stability.
Like stability, not certainty. That line stays with you, especially today when leaders feel pressure to have all the answers. I think we should choose stability over certainty. Let's talk about fixers and operators, right? You've said almost every role you have taken up has been about fixing something or setting it up rather than running steady operations. When did you first realize this was your strength?
That's an interesting question. I think I need to go back into my past to answer that. I think it was during my time when I was at Lintas, and we're talking about the 90s. Lintas, specifically Lintas Bombay, was an incredible learning environment. I think it was possibly a very, very unique place at that point in time. We had very good clients who treated us as part of their teams. And I think critically, this is where I picked up my whole theories on leadership. Lintas as an organization had amazing leaders. They, first of all, shared their wisdom very freely. Nobody held back. Every chance they could, they would coach you. Yeah. And they would do it in a style which was, something that you look forward to. It was always like, hey, I had done something like this, and then this is what happened, and this is what I learned. It's very rare to get leaders who want to share their experiences so freely. Everyone tries to, my secret, I don't want to tell anybody. That's why I say it was a very unique organization, and I'll reflect on this later in our conversation as well. So they were very willing to share, and importantly, they empowered you. They would let you learn on your own, and if you made mistakes, which you inevitably did, they would back you. And that's when I started picking up all these principles. Now, what happened was, as my time in Lintas continued, I was given more and more independence. I was giving more and more responsibility, and that helped me get better at certain things. And therefore, I was part of the team that was then Lintas started deputing us overseas. What led to that was this whole practice of setting up a regional innovation center. Unilever had been very successful in India in creating so-called recipes of success for certain brands. And these therefore became regional innovation centers for certain markets, right? Like growing markets, developing markets. And some of us were given the task of taking this knowledge that we had learned and then disseminating it across multiple markets. And that's how I started my, foray overseas. Now, what this meant was we were essentially going into different countries and saying, guys, here's what we're going to do now. Okay. So literally overnight, that organization would need to change its ways of doing things. And that's when I realized that thankfully, the way I have had experiences, the way I've learned, it was something I enjoyed. So being able to go and set up a new way of doing things, being able to answer the questions that not just the agencies, but the clients would have. because obviously clients were also, worried about A, losing their autonomy, but more importantly, uh, will it work? How do we know this will work? It's different when you've done this for a number of years and you can speak with a certain authority. Yeah. So that's when I realized, okay, I do have the ability to set things up. And what was also critical for me to understand is I could do this because of all the experience I've had. And that experience, literally, as David Ogilvy says, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants, right? It's because of that. So I think going back, that's when I first started realizing that this is an area of strength for me.
It was something you gradually leaned into because you enjoyed the responsibility and the ambiguity.
Like I said, it's also because I knew I had the experience to pull it off. Yeah.
Understood. But how would you explain the difference between a fixer and an operator, right? Not in titles, but in mindset and the behavior.
I think I would look at it a little bit differently because I think sometimes maybe it's just me, but the word fixer doesn't quite resonate with me. I see it as, one is you've got a ship going on an ocean. Everything is smooth. Everything is nice.
Mm,
People are sitting enjoying, drinks on the balcony and so on. And on the other side, you've got somebody who has to navigate rough seas and so on. Correct. The first one would be basically keeping the boat steady, right? Steer out of turbulent waters, chart your way to make sure that nobody feels that the boat is being rocked. So essentially, you need a very steady hand. Yeah, people know we have grown at 10% a year. We will continue to grow at 10% a year. And I think that is somebody who is a steady operator. On the other side, you need somebody who is going to be able to take a lot of difficult decisions. So going back to the analogy of being in rough seas, which way do you turn your ship next? Do you believe the weather report that this turbulent weather is going to continue? Do you believe that your engines will continue till you find some safe shore? How do you do it? Nothing is wrong with either approach. And this is something I must say. I have a certain skill that I believe in passionately. That doesn't mean it's the only skill that the world needs. If you see 90% of the world's organizations, they need a steady hand.
mm,
Yeah. Most of the world's organizations need a steady hand because that's just how they are built. When was the last time you saw PepsiCo come up with something revolutionary? Never. But what have they done? They have consolidated their business and they have grown from just being a soft drinks marketer to moving into foods and then to
mm,
improving the quality of the foods and so on. So they are steady and growing at it. If you look at Tesla, on the other hand, it had started as a disruptor. Yeah. So there are different traits, and I think you, like I keep saying, you just need to find the right thing for you.
mm.
So I think different folks need different things. So that's how the mindset would differ. Having the ability to maintain a steady course versus being able to rapidly change.
One isn't better than the other, but they are just built for different seas. That the ship
Exactly.
metaphor is incredibly clear and it removes any hierarchy between the two roles, right? Many people want to become, say, fixers or disruptors, maybe because it sounds exciting. But based on your experience, why can't everyone or even most people play that role effectively?
So, I said this at the beginning, and I believe it passionately. It is personality. You are who you are.
Mm,
That's the end of the story. You cannot change it, no matter what you try. You cannot attend, some famous fellow's workshop and come out to be an empowered or an enlightened
mm,
leader. Uh, you have to identify who you are and embrace it. This is really critical. And then find the roles that will suit you. Uh, that's the reason why not too many people can do it. And
mm,
most importantly, it takes a lot of difficult decisions. You have to be able to take those difficult decisions in a dispassionate manner. Yeah. What I keep telling everyone is, and this is not just related to decision making, everything is professional. There is nothing personal. Yeah. If we are, let's take a different example. If we are promoting somebody to the head of a company or a head of an market, we're not doing it because we like the person. Yeah. In a good organization, there is plenty of favoritism that happens also, but that organization will never be successful in the long run. but you're doing it because you've seen that person scale, you've seen that person grow, and therefore you know those qualities will be useful to push the company forward. So it's all about professional professional reasons. So the difficult decisions that you need to take, not everyone is comfortable doing it, and I think that's where you separate the wannabes from the one who can actually do it.
When you enter an organization, right, that needs fixing, some people already know change is coming. But how do you balance speed, empathy, and decisiveness in those early months?
So there are lots of theories for everything. I mean, you cannot
Mm,
be in an organization without being told that there are 7 books you must read. So whether it is leadership, whether it's decision making, there will be a lot of books. And I believe there's a book called The First 90 Days. I think two things become very, very critical as you get into a situation like this. People in the organization are not blind to the facts around them. They know there has been a change that's been made. They know why the change is made. What they want to know is, what is the change? Yeah. And how is it going to impact me as a person in this organization? So to help smoothen all that, the two things that are critical are speed and decisiveness. And what do I mean by that? The first thing, again, like we said right at the start, is setting the goal, which automatically is connected to finding out what's wrong and therefore what needs fixing. The minute you set a goal, that tells people, okay, you know what? This is where we are going to go next as a team, as an organization, or anything. That's being decisive. But the second thing is speed. I truly believe that I read this thing about the first 90 days. I think there are parts of it that are true. I think 90 days is too long. Again, personal opinion. I think within the first month or so, people must see a visible change in the organization and its behavior. Or even if you look at it as a team, yeah, your clients must say, oh my gosh, they're working really differently now. Otherwise, they lose patience. We had a new person who came in, and you know what? Nothing's changed. So, speed is very, very critical. Having made a decision, you need to implement it really quickly. And that's where the difficult decisions come in, correct? So, for instance, the decision to change the creative team. That had to be taken very, very quickly because the client
mm,
was already tired. And that signals that this is an organization that's serious. Because if you set a goal and then you take your own sweet time getting around to it, people will always feel, oh, you know what, nothing's really changed. So, he said that everything will be different, but you know what, we're doing exactly the same thing. So, you have to approach it with empathy because obviously, when you are looking at fixing things, so to speak, there'll be a lot of difficult decisions which you need to take. Empathy is crucial at that point in time, but in the service of decisiveness. For example, we will often find that when there is dissatisfaction, it has come from bad performance. When there's bad performance, there is always a reason for it. I think empathy comes in when you try to find out what that reason is. Because it's very easy to say, client is not happy with so and so person. Let's get rid
mm.
of them, him, her. I think you owe it to that person to find out what is the issue. Is it that their bosses have not given them the right direction? Is it that they're going through some personal crisis? Now, you can say that, hang on, personal crisis, professional thing, what's the connection? No, I mean, people are, you know, individuals are people too. You need to be aware of the fact that there are things outside the work environment that can impact them. So it's very critical to find out what's wrong, give a chance to fix it. Yeah. And then if it still hasn't worked, therefore the only decision is to move forward. So set a goal very, very clearly, move very quickly on it, and be very decisive about it.
You said these aren't quick fixes, they might even take years. What usually breaks first? The strategy, or the people, or leadership patience?
That's a really interesting thing because I think, you know, your starting point is the strategy, correct?
Mm,
So unless your strategy was based on wrong data or,
mm,
bad judgment or something unforeseen occurred, good strategy will always take time. It's
mm,
never instant. So what breaks usually is one of two things: the people or the patience of the leadership.
mm,
Because let's not forget, the leadership is also under pressure. So, for instance, when I came in to, you know, set up a team for one of our projects, you know that has to be done quickly. You know the client's not going to wait 6 months to a year to get your act together. In a situation like that, the temptation is, you know what, let's just move fast. Correct. Or sometimes the people get tired because we were waiting, we thought it would happen overnight, but it didn't happen overnight. Let's look at Tesla, for example. Tesla took time to come to where it is, and now it's facing its own crisis. It's not a stable world. But typically, what happens is one of these two things: patience, either with the leadership or with the people. And it's typically because they've had unrealistic assumptions. Typically, because of unrealistic assumptions, certain things will take their own time, which is why I say, data based on good judgment. If you are going to do something, you need to know, yes, I can change a team, but do I have the talent outside to change the team?
Mm.
Is there other talent in my organization that I can leverage? Because if there isn't, I'm stuck. So that judgment of saying, you know what, I'll try with these guys. I'm going to give them 10 days. And if nothing happens in the 10 days, these are the three people I'm going to go talk to for help.
Mm.
Yeah. So unrealistic assumptions lead to a lack of patience.
Got it. Even unrealistic expectations as well, right? From the client's end.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's where managing expectations comes into play.
Mm.
I had a leader once who actually told a client, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm.
And for me, that was such an important learning because you are telling the client up front, listen, my friend, I know you've had a difficult time with us, but guess what? It'll get worse before it gets better.
Got it. So that's such a practical insight. Most transformations fail not because the idea was wrong, but because expectations or assumptions were unrealistic. Yeah. So Sanjay, I
And
think.
go back to what we've been discussing for some time now, Gautam. It all comes down to personality. I was wowed
Mm.
by this guy because he told the client point blank.
Mm.
Correct. Now, that's his personality. He didn't
Mm.
try to, sugarcoat it or anything. He didn't play
Mm.
the corporate line of, don't worry, we are committed to excellence and growth and this and
Yeah.
we will do what it takes kind of stuff. Yeah.
Let's talk more about the brand building side, the global brand building. You have worked on brands at a truly global level. What's the biggest mistake marketers make when they try to globalize an idea?
I think here's the starting point. The minute you decide to globalize something, what you've
Mm-hmm.
done is you decided that localization doesn't work. Okay. Now,
Mm.
this might be for several factors. I think there are two critical factors that drive globalization. The first is the need to have the brand be the same person in every market. And this is how it started initially, correct? Brands spoke differently in different markets, which is not right. Coca-Cola must mean the same thing in every country in the world. KFC must mean the same thing in every country in the world. It cannot stand for two different things. So that was the starting point of globalization. Let us have big, strong brands. When Nike, for example, it means the same thing everywhere. That was a very, very good starting point. That then automatically led into implications like cost savings and so on and so forth. And the assumption that therefore you don't need to do anything locally. Yeah.
Mm.
You have a global idea and life is going to be fine. That's, I think, where the first mistake is. So the starting point was right. It was all about, you know, um, having a similar or the same brand image all across. But I think where it went wrong was making the mistake that strategy is one size that'll fit everything. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. The main thing is to first find a universal idea. Now, if you work with anyone in communication, that's not possible. It's very, very difficult. It's not actually. It's very, it's not very simple, but it's not as hard as everyone makes it out to be. Why? Because, and I'm telling you this from my experience, okay, I worked in 14 countries and each of these countries has been dramatically different. You might say China and Japan are the same, but they're radically different. They're radically different. Similarly, Japan is radically different from, say, India. Thailand is again a different market. Latin America is a very different market. But at the core of it, people are more or less the same. And what do I mean by that? Let's look at some basic principles like success. You would be hard pressed to find somebody who does not want to be successful in life. Okay. What might be different from country to country might be the definition of that success.
Mm.
In many countries in the world, success would be I have made it to the top of the corporate ladder.
Mm.
In many places, success would be I have now, become, for example, a well known artist and it gives me satisfaction at a creative level. Yeah. So success can be monetary, success can be physical. I've told myself I'm now Mr. Universe or whatever, but everyone wants to be successful. Similarly, happiness is universal, but the way people express happiness is different. So the first task is to find out something or an idea or an emotion or a situation that your brand can lean into that is universal. If you try to find differences, there'll be hundreds, thousands of differences. And that's where you will never be able to lean into a global idea. But if you look for similarities, there will be a few. So find the strongest similarity. And then this is the crucial part. Once you have that, back it up by a memorable execution. Somebody becoming happy because they became the CEO will give you executions like a man dreaming about how he always wanted to be at the top and now he is top. He's at the top. You will see a press clipping, new CEO. You will see his family very happy, but that's not memorable. So, how do you come up with a memorable execution for it? That execution has to be flexible enough to resonate locally, right? So, globalization is not about having the same execution everywhere. It's about having a very strong, powerful idea, which is executed in a very impactful way, and it is nuanced globally. Sorry, nuanced locally.
Obsessing over differences, you are asking teams to hunt for that shared human truths, which are kind of universal or globally kind of relatable or resonate with everyone.
Yes, and
Uh,
that's actually an organizational factor because think of it. The minute
mm,
you decided to go global and not local, the local
mm,
markets lost their authority, correct?
mm,
And the standard pushback will always be, and we used to see this when we worked with India as well. Oh, but India is different.
mm,
Yeah. And if you're working with China, they'll say, no, but China is different. If you're
mm,
working with Japan, they'll say, oh, but obviously
mm,
Japanese people are all very different. Now, I can pick on a similarity between the three and say all three of them like rice at a very, very
mm.
base level.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I can spin that for a rice brand into their emotional relationship with rice.
Mm. Got it.
Yeah. And how a brand fits into it. Correct.
Understood.
So if you want to look for differences, there are lots. There are enough similarities. But like I said, the crucial thing is once you find the similarity, the way you bring it to life has to be memorable.
Many of your successes, right, required unlearning what a brand was known for. How do leaders know when a brand has become a limitation?
Interesting one. I think the reality is a brand truth should not change. Yeah. Maybe I don't call it the brand truth, but I think a brand's DNA should never
Mm,
change. A brand stands for one thing. For example, if I look at one of the brands that I worked with, Gillette. Gillette has always stood for the best a man can get. Yeah.
mm,
We tweaked it to a best a man can be, but it's all about the best a man can possibly get or be. Why? Because it was all about shaving and therefore projecting a certain persona. That cannot change. Gillette cannot become, for example, a beauty brand. So there is an intrinsic core DNA to the brand itself. What might change is, the need to update it to stay relevant. So, for example, if you look at Gillette, and you probably might remember this also, Gautam, being clean shaven was very critical in the professional environment. Okay, what we've seen over the last 15 odd years is facial hair has become more common. Yeah. And it goes the whole gamut, correct? From being able to put this whole, what they would call, I guess, a hipster beard, uh, to, I was working in the Middle East, to having such a finely sculpted beard. You're like, man, how long does it take you in the morning to get ready? Right. So being clean shaven is no longer critical. Now, when the world has moved on, do you then stop making razors? Or do you adapt to a world where certain things are no longer as good? Yeah. Um, Gillette in China had a very, very interesting time because, the very nature of the market is electric razors are far more common. And it was difficult to say, you know what, use my manual razor when an electric razor is actually cheaper,
Mm.
correct? But what we leaned on over there was the reality that you need to still be the best, correct? And for that, you're now putting in a lot of effort into skin. So don't damage it with an electric razor.
Got it.
Yeah. So the core of the brand does not change. The way you look at it, at the same point in time in the US and in Europe, and indeed even in India, you are seeing people with more facial hair.
Mm.
The brand had to be able to sync with both of them and not lose who they were as a brand. And it's not that they haven't tried, correct? Way back in the past, Gillette did come up with a range of, body care, not body care, but face care solutions also. But it didn't work. It didn't work because its role, its DNA was a very strong and a very cleared one.
Brand DNA doesn't change, but how it's expressed must. And then the Gillette China shift, they shifted away from the closest shave. I think you mentioned about that in our previous conversation, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what gave you and the client the confidence to redefine something so fundamental? So,
And I think it came down to a very simple fact. I just mentioned it as well. If you're taking great care of your skin, don't spoil it with an electric razor.
mm,
Now, we started out with this first principle that what we are doing is not working.
mm,
Yes. So otherwise we wouldn't be in this situation. It is not working. So the first is identifying what is the problem. Having identified that we are not being able to make headway with what we promise you at a global level, how do we then look at what we should do in this market without going away from who we are as a brand? Now, we did a lot of research, obviously, with organizations like PNG, brands like Gillette. There is a huge amount of rigor that goes into it, but the rigor can only take you that far. Like I said, data can only do so much, research can only do so much. There was a very interesting sign I saw in one of the organizations I used to work with. I won't tell you which one, but this was in the company's own market research team. And there was this very nice sign somebody had put up saying, any company large enough to have its own market research team is large enough to ignore it, which told me two things. The first
yeah,
is there was a level of humor in that organization and the ability to put up a sign like that without having to worry about repercussions. To have the confidence that, yes, this organization is not going to punish me for my point of view or whatever. Anyway, you have to have the research tell you what it is, give you a potential solution, but it comes down to, are you going to try it out? Yeah. At this point in time, I want to give you an anecdote from one of my first clients. They had a very, I'll go back to, singing praises of Unilever. Uh, I've enjoyed working with them because almost every person I interacted with at Unilever had one trait, courage. Yeah. And I think trait alongside with that, which led to that courage, was curiosity. And we were in this whole big discussion, and he's like, you know what? Let's do it. What's the worst that can happen? Now, yes, what's the worst that can happen is a total brand collapse, but you have to know that what you're doing isn't going to lead to that.
mm,
Yeah. But many people get paralyzed by even making a small change because they don't want to be known as the person who destroyed a brand.
mm, got it.
So I think the willingness of the client to chart a different path was critical at that point in time.
Got it. How critical is client courage in global brand success, and what happens when it's missing?
I think, just like Fixer, I don't like the word
Mm,
courage because the implication is if you don't have courage, you're a coward. I don't think it's that. I think at the end of the day, every person in an organization is an individual with some responsibilities. They have responsibilities in their career, in their personal life, and so on. It's very easy to say, oh, they're not brave enough. But you know
mm,
what? Based on your idea, if it goes wrong, they lose their job. They lose their job. The kids don't go to university. And
mm,
it's very easy for someone to sit there and say, they're not brave. For all you know, they might have done a lot of due diligence. There might be
yeah,
different priorities in the organization. There
mm,
might be other stakes, yeah, which you may not be aware of. But I think fundamentally comes down to the willingness of the individual to take a risk. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think bigger than that is the organization's acceptance of the potential failure. Yeah. Uh, I'll give you another anecdote on this. Unilever in the past had a launch of a very, very important brand in the UK, Persil. Okay, Persil was a detergent. I won't go into too many details because once you get into the details, you understand why it failed. And then, you understand why did you therefore launch, right? But Persil was a very critical, it's still a very critical brand for Unilever. Persil had a very high profile launch, incredibly high profile, which then tanked in an equally high profile way. Okay, so they essentially said that we've got a great new detergent which works at double the speed. And a few days later, Procter and Gamble had a press conference where they showed that when you wash delicate fabrics with that powder, it eats holes in them. Now, scientifically correct, absolutely accurate, and Unilever had no choice but to completely cancel the launch and pull the brand back. Now, what do you think would have happened to the person who led this launch? In normal conditions, like he would have been penalized, correct? There might have been issues. I mean, come on, it's a very high profile failure.
Mm.
That person then went on to become the CEO,
Got it.
right? Now, you have to be in an organization where you know that it's like, let's look at cricket, correct?
Mm.
I could go for the big one, I could get caught, or I could win the match.
Mm.
If you win the match, are you willing to take that risk, or are you going to say, you know what, forget it, I'm not? And is the organization going to penalize you for its risk? I
Mm.
won't tell you which company I'm referring to now, but in one of the teams I worked with, we actually had an acknowledgement of the worst idea. Yeah. And we all learned from it that, look, this is how we should not do it. So I think the willingness and the ability to take a risk, and equally knowing that this organization won't penalize me for it.
Mm.
I don't think it's courage. I think it's having these two facts in your hand that I am willing to take the risk. And if it doesn't work out, it's not going to be the end of my career. Now, let's not forget, there are very few companies in the world which will let this happen. Yeah, in most places. I mean, look at what happened with Starbucks recently, correct? The CEO came in and within 18 months or 12 months, he was gone. He couldn't make it work and he was gone. So, not too many organizations will give you this flexibility.
I appreciate that reframing. Innovation isn't about bravery alone, but or courage, but about whether systems allow people to fail safely. What does an outsider see in a market that insiders often miss?
I think it comes down to basically being out of touch with reality. And it's often a natural progression, correct? Think of it, when you start out, you're in the trenches all the time. Yeah. And as you start moving up the ladder, you move out from fighting in the trenches to being the guy who's drawing the lines on the map, to being the person who is then having discussions with leadership about what should be the next
Mm.
plan and so on. The minute you're out of the trenches, you're out of touch with reality.
Mm.
And there is a danger, and we see this all the time. And I think I'm very unhappy to say that you see a lot more of this now than we used to before. I think most of the marketers now are so completely delusional or out of touch with reality that it's no surprise that they fail so spectacularly. Yeah. They have no real clue about how their consumers, who their consumers are, what they want, what is the reason for their organization's existence, and so on. The best organizations will always have a systematic way of keeping people close to the consumer. I will again, talk about companies like Unilever and Procter and Gamble. We would always do consumer research. Okay. And by consumer research, I'm not talking about sitting in an air conditioned room behind a one way mirror listening to people talk. We would be in, for example, on Gillette, we would be in Dharavi,
Mm.
inside people's houses asking them to shave or finding out
Mm.
more about them. We would be in the slums in Jakarta also,
Mm.
trying to find out how women take care of their skin. You're talking to people in the places where they are. We would be in Mexico talking to ladies about how do they take care of their aging problems.
Mm.
So it's not just about knowing the consumers, but actually seeing I mean, I've had situations where I actually have pictures of this. There's 7 of us in a Chinese person's home in Shanghai looking at him shave because we want to see how do people shave in real life. And you might say, what the hell? Don't you shave all the time? But yes, different people shave differently. So this is again another small anecdote from my life. I told you Chinese people use more of electric razors. They almost never use a manual razor because electric razors are so much cheaper. Secondly, it's so much
Mm,
cooler to use an electric razor. And
mm,
thirdly, you remember your father getting cut and all and bleeding, and you don't want to
yeah.
go through that. So when you give a Chinese person a manual razor for the first time and shaving foam, they don't know how to use it. I have photos where we've given this gentleman a shaving can and he's spraying it on his face because he's never seen that
Yeah.
you need to put it in your hand and then put it on your face. So knowing that that's how people behave, therefore there is a need to educate them and so on. So, the organizations have a way of keeping people, keeping marketers, keeping leaders, even agency people close to it, not just consumers. Part of when I worked with these markets, we used to do store checks. We used to actually go to shops and talk to owners and find out, how do they buy the products in the sense like how do they judge whether a product is going to be successful or not. The biggest example that we learned was you could sit and design a poster, but you have no idea how the poster is going to be used in the shop. Correct. A little bit of old thinking because a lot of online purchases happen, but a lot of in-store purchases happen too. Simple facts like do you know how the product is made? Unilever would take us to factories and show us how the product is made. And that's what I mean. The best organizations will have a systematic way of making sure their marketers are close to the consumer, whether it is through
Mm,
store checks or home visits or, consumer research. It's not easy because it means you're taking a lot of your time out.
mm.
It's not comfortable because instead of sitting in your air conditioned office, you're walking through hot streets and so on and so forth. And that's why there are very few organizations who do this successfully.
Sanjay, let's move on to the next segment about careers and AI. Say, if someone is starting out today, what kind of environments should they be aiming for and why?
I think the answer is pretty straightforward, but not an easy one. And by that, what I mean, and this is where I said right at the start, I'm going to come back to this towards the latter part of our conversation. I believe very strongly that the best way to build a career is to work with the best organizations
Mm,
in their fields. I was reading up on an interview with somebody, and they were talking about tech, and they were saying how crucial it is for somebody to spend a certain amount of time with a Google versus
mm,
hopping from one failed startup to another failed startup. Yeah. That steady Google experience will always stand you in your career than a series of failed startups. Yeah. And I'm being very specific, failed companies, because you haven't been good enough in your judgment to get the sense whether this company you're joining is going to be successful or not. And I don't think people pay enough attention to it when they start planning their careers. They get swept away by, oh, this territory is hot. Everybody's going into this. Everyone's going into this company. Let me join. I think you need to start with the best company in that field. Why? Because the best organizations will always attract the best clients, uh, whether it is uh, an advertising agency, a communications company, or even, for example, if you're a laptop manufacturer like Lenovo, you will always get the best corporates choosing Lenovo.
mm,
Okay. Now, what does that mean? The best organizations get the best clients, which means you automatically attract the best talent.
mm.
Why? Because the talent knows this is the place I'm going to be able to build my career. I will have the funds to make it happen. Let's continue our Lenovo example. You will have people playing with the best new displays or the best ways. I don't know if you've seen this new one from Lenovo. The entire keyboard is the PC, right? They built
Okay.
the PC into the keyboard itself. Now you will have engineers who are able to do all this because they know
Mm,
Lenovo wants to continuously innovate so that they can always offer their clients the best things. It basically becomes a virtuous cycle. You're the best, so you want to be successful so that you can continue to attract the best clients. So you will always get the best talents who will then produce great work, which makes you
Mm,
even more successful. It's a very virtuous cycle. Now, with this whole thing about AI and so on, I think for the next few years, we're going to see a lot of organizations go the wrong way.
mm,
Very, very unfortunately, and our industry is a big culprit in this. Everybody gets attracted by the shiny new toys
mm,
because everybody wants to make a play for it because nobody wants to miss the boat. Look at Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook. That was his first success. If you look at everything after that, it's been one spectacular failure after another.
mm,
How much money did he invest in the metaverse? Rebranded the company to Meta. Spectacular failure. A lot of investment in AI. Another spectacular failure. But what is he really good at? He's very good at identifying what will work and then scaling it. Instagram, WhatsApp. He identified what was good and scaled it using his reach. So, you know, we'll see a lot of people making wrong decisions. And that's unfortunately the reality. It's going to be therefore very difficult to find these roles I'm talking about, yeah,
mm,
in the top companies and so on, because you could have been an AI guy at Meta and you would have thought that your life is made only to be, acknowledge that Meta is going completely the wrong way. So
mm.
it's going to be more difficult for sure. But I do not think that there is another better way. Latching yourself onto a successful organization is the best way to build your talent.
Why does scale matter so much early in a career?
Like I said, a few minutes ago, scale attracts talent.
Mm,
Why does it attract talent? Because it will give you a bigger canvas. Let us look at some communication examples. We talked about Lenovo before. Let's look at some communication examples. If you remember, both Coke and Pepsi used to do mega budget commercials. Because we know they have the scale, we know the best directors will come to work on those commercials. Because you have the best directors, those commercials will be more widely seen. And because they'll be more widely seen, more passionate people will come and join that team. Yeah. So scale is what gives you the canvas to work on. If you're a small company, and we see this now, and I'm not casting shade at anyone. When I was in communications and I'm still in communications, the clients we were talking to, we would be talking about big budget films and, investments and so on. And what are we talking about now? Let's do a reel for Instagram.
mm,
Which place do you think is going to get the better talent? So it's the scale which gives talent a big canvas, and that's why they're attracted to it. Expectations of success will then automatically drive your performance. You know that you have to do something spectacular, so you put your
mm.
best into it.
So if you are starting your career today in an AI first world, like what would you do the same and what would you do differently?
I think I would not change one key factor, which is I would still look for the top organizations. We started out with my example on Lintas. I think Lintas's organizational culture made me the person I am because of that strong culture of independence and giving people flexibility and so on. It will drive, it drove my performance, and therefore an organization like that will drive anyone's performance. So I don't think my suggestion of starting out with the companies at the top is something I would change. What I would do differently is probably honestly nothing. Yeah.
Mm,
But this is incredibly personal to me because I've been fortunate enough to recognize my strengths. I have also been flexible enough to try and move different geographies. The first place I moved out to was Lebanon. Now, that's not
mm,
typically the first country that would come onto anyone's radar, but I've also worked in Japan twice. And therefore, I think what I've done is I've also been open to grabbing opportunities. So I would say start with the big people and put your hand up for everything that you think could be interesting and help your career.
Where does AI genuinely help with creative work, and where does it fundamentally fail?
I think it helps with creative work in the sense we can explore different directions very quickly. And I'll give you a
Mm,
simple example. When we are doing layouts,
mm,
typically, say you have a team of three art directors. You would brief your three art directors and say, listen, guys, this is the idea. I want to see, I want to bring to life a person enjoying ice cream. Okay. Now, these three art directors will probably take a day to hash out different ideas and then come back to you. AI can do that for you in minutes right now. Now, what does that mean? That means you can explore many different territories very quickly. And I think that's where it's really useful because you're no longer limited to what people can do. The scale that you can operate at is limitless, and therefore you can explore many, many things. I think that's where it's very useful. I think where it will fail completely, and there's nothing wrong fundamentally other than the reality that the principle of AI is it builds on what exists. Yeah. At a very technical level, it can only build. It cannot come up with a new idea. So it can only look for existing connections and bring them to life. It cannot
mm,
spawn a new connection. And that's where I think, at least for the foreseeable future, it will always fail, which is in coming up and creating, bringing a new idea to life. We've explored this a lot because in my recent roles, we've not only played around with AI in terms of visuals, but for example, in the old days when I wanted to do recording, I would have to go to a studio, I would have to hire a talent, I would tell them, okay, now do this in an emotional way or put more emphasis on this line. I can do that right now on my laptop and
mm,
listen to it in half an hour. Yeah. So I can explore a lot of things, but I can never get the magic of somebody saying, hey, but did you ever think, what if I did this in this style? What
mm.
do you think it would sound like? Yeah.
So, as execution becomes cheaper with AI, what becomes the real value of senior roles?
I think the most important thing is experience. I think that's the most critical thing which matters because AI can let you explore a lot of alternatives. But without having the experience to know what works or the ability to say, you know what, there's an interesting idea in this. Why don't we leverage it further? I can give you an example where on one of the projects that we were doing, we asked AI to imagine for us what would Dubai look like as a city of the future. Correct. And yes, there were those typical imagery that you got and so on. But our senior art director was able to spot something very interesting
Mm,
and say, okay, now leverage this, make the ocean a little bit this, make the towers a little bit more tapered, make the
mm,
sun shine from this angle, have the reflections on this side. Now,
mm,
that guidance could only come from somebody who has honed
yeah.
their
Mm,
craft. So, AI allowed us to experiment a lot, but it was a judgment and experience of a creative person who was able to find an interesting thought within an execution and bring it to life in a dramatic way. So I think that seniority will always be crucial and not have I mean, you need the seniority, you need the understanding of how things work and the maturity to not be swept away by, oh, new shiny toy.
got it. But how should leaders think about nurturing creativity going forward?
I think it's all about building a culture that will reward creativity because creativity is not just about communication. Many people think that creativity is visual arts or it's like, making an interesting Instagram reel or having a good looking post or doing a nice TikTok. It's not, that's not, I mean, yes, it is creativity, but that's not all creativity is. For example, creativity is all about even presenting data in an interesting way,
Mm,
right? Because on its own, when you're talking to leadership, data can be very, very boring. When you say that we're going to have a presentation on insights, you can almost imagine people saying, bloody hell, there's going to be 145 slides of things to look at. Yeah. But how you bring it to life is also creativity. We had this colleague of ours, we were doing this very big regional workshop in Shanghai. And one of the things was an self introduction. Obviously, when you have so many different people, how do you introduce yourself? And all of us had done the classic thing, where, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is what excites me. There was one of our colleagues who actually made a video. Yeah. And he made the video in a very cartoon style. And he recorded his
Mm,
own voiceover, almost like a mystery story. And he played that as his introduction. Now, obviously, at the end of the meeting, everybody knew who he was, and they had forgotten the rest of the 50 people that we were. And the task was very simple, right? Introduce yourself. So I think you need to be a culture that rewards creativity.
Sanjay, looking back across your 35 years of experience, right? What belief about leadership or branding have you changed your mind about?
I think without sounding, this might sound wrong, but, and certainly I don't mean to be arrogant, but I think the last 35 odd years have basically confirmed what I believe in. We should take our job seriously.
Mm,
Yeah. We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. We need to examine everything with a pinch of salt. Why do I say that? Because people look for easy solutions. Like I said, things are not difficult, but the rigor to carry them out is very hard. So people look for easy solutions. Let's look at a simple concept like loyalty, brand loyalty. People will always try to say brand loyalty is critical. We need people who
mm,
are loyal to our brands. They will come up with words like, brand fanatics and so on and so
mm,
forth. And most of the marketers will go in for this. Our first job is to increase brand loyalty by X%. Right?
mm.
It does exist, but the proportion to your overall consumers is in single digits of any brand in the world. Yeah. And if there is a brand which has really high brand loyalty, I can guarantee you it's a very small brand. It's a niche brand. It's a D2C brand. That's the reality. People are not loyal to brands. Now, if you don't accept that, you're going to
Mm,
drive your entire life in a very different direction. You will always be looking at a wrong principle and therefore putting in jeopardy the organization that you work in as well as your career. So I think you need to be very, very clear about, you know, what you believe in and why you believe in it.
got it. That's very provocative and probably uncomfortable for many marketers to hear. But what's a decision that looked wrong in the moment that was a right one?
I think I think one of the few areas which I would have looked at is it was a bit uncomfortable, but changing teams was one. I think the other example which I would kind of look at is typically when organizations are building a regional team, the task is to build a United Nations in a central location. So, for example, if we are going to do advertising or communications or integrated marketing for Asia Pacific, let us build a hub in Hong Kong, which is now obviously not critical anymore. Let's build a hub in Singapore or Jakarta or somewhere, and let's get the right people over there. When we started working on Gillette, we took a very interesting decision, which is we said we will structure it very differently and we will keep the creative resources in each market rather than bring them to a central location. It was counterintuitive because typically all regional teams work from a center because it's very easy, right? I mean, everybody is in the same place. You go, you talk to them
Mm,
and wrap it up versus having people in different markets. So we had a lot of thinking about it. Like, is this the right way to do it? And time told us that it was the correct way. Why? From a cost principle, we did not have a very high overhead in one location, but critically, the talent was close to the market. By having a you know team in China, by having a team in Indonesia, you were always reassured of the fact that that team is so locally immersed that they'll be able to come back to you with the best quality of work. So I think that was an interesting one. We thought we should try something different. We weren't sure that it would be successful, but we had a inkling that it would, and it turned out to be right.
great. If there is one mindset that compounds over decades, what would that be?
I think, in a simple word, curiosity, the desire to learn more about anything and everything. And I think what happens is as you go up the corporate ladder, curiosity decreases. Yeah. And I think that's where the problems step in. I think the question why is possibly the most important one. People are no longer eating potato chips. Why?
Hmm.
Yeah, because they are fried. Okay. Why is that the case? Why can't we do it another way? Should we try looking at baked potato chips? Or going the other way? Do we want to be a sinful indulgence? You will never see a brand like, Ben& Jerry's, for the
Hmm.
lack of a better word, to come in with a diet ice cream
Hmm.
because their ice cream is about a guilty indulgence.
Hmm.
It is full of bold flavors, and yes, in the old days it used to stand for something, but genuinely nobody cares. Nobody's eating ice cream because they support a cause. They're eating ice cream because they love the flavors. So I think, the curiosity to learn more, to explore more, to find out where could we be as a brand is absolutely critical.
Got it. That's a beautiful note to end, right? Curiosity keeps leaders relevant, humble, and evolving. Actually, right? Sanjay, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your perspective so openly. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me, Gautam. It was a pleasure to chat with you. I just want to end on that one simple note. We talked about leadership a lot. First thing, find out who you are. Don't shy away from it. Embrace it with an open heart. Don't try to be someone you're not. Okay. Find out who
Hmm.
you are as a person. Embrace it with your heart. Build on it constantly. And then find places to bring it to life. That's all I would say. Thanks for having me, Gautam.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you so much. And I've personally learnt a lot. And to everyone listening, if there is one thread that runs through this entire conversation, it's this: frameworks don't create outcomes, courage does, and courage is rarely comfortable, popular, or safe. Whether it's leadership, brand building, career choices, or creativity in an AI driven world, knowing what to do is rarely the problem. Having the conviction to actually do it is. If this episode made you rethink how you make decisions, how you build your career, or how you lead people, then it's done its job. If you found value here, share this episode with someone who's at a crossroad. And if you're enjoying Marketing Growth Circle, follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn for more conversations like this. Thank you for listening.